Well, again, thank you very much. This is our last meeting. I was saying to Brian today, seems to have gone incredibly quickly to me. The 5
It
weeks
does.
have just flown by somehow, even though we're in lockdown.
I know, time goes very quickly.
So there we are. And as I said to you in my note when I sent the Kingdom poem, I'll quite miss 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, gearing up.
Agree.
Miss seeing all your smiling faces. But thank you very much anyway for coming and
Thank you,
supporting this
Barbara.
effort in Lent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Barbara.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure for me. I really enjoy it, so it's no burden. Okay, we'll start with our prayer and then get on with it. Let us pray. O Lord, as we join together on this Lent course, we pray that you will help us to see more clearly and believe more wholeheartedly in many aspects of our faith. May these paintings come alive to us as we share our thoughts and reactions today. Deepen our understanding and our love for you through these studies. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Right, well, I've said to 1 or 2 people I've spoken to recently, we've come to a rather hard end for this course, and I have reflected on why did I wind up on the very last meeting with these 2 paintings, which are much less accessible, in some ways much more miserable than some of the paintings we've been looking at. But on the other hand, they do give us a very good lead in to Holy Week, as you'll see, but they're much more gritty than the sort of some of the paintings we've looked at. And the first painting we're going to look at is an artist I personally discovered from his book, a chap called Roger Wagner, and Ben has actually heard him give a lecture on art, and you'll see behind him there is a portrait of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin.
Oh, yes.
Lovely.
Yes, because Roger was apparently the first person to paint a portrait of him, asked to paint a portrait, and there it is. And I hadn't seen it, so that's interesting, Ben, that. And up on the right-hand side is the church in Oxford, St Giles, where the painting we're going to start off looking at this afternoon is in fact on display since it was bought. And it's that rather huge painting there that you can see on the wall just near the stained glass window. And it is a pretty awesome painting. When I got a reproduction at home, which I've got here, Brian walked in as I was unpacking it and said, "Is that the sort of thing you could have on your wall?" And I think when you look at it, we'll decide probably not. The answer to that may well be no. And I wondered how the people who worship at St Giles felt about it, in that it's a pretty grim picture and also very large. So a little bit about Roger. Born in 57, as we can see there. He's a man of many talents, a real Renaissance man, really, because he doesn't only paint beautifully, but he also writes some lovely poetry and also does stained glass. He does a range of things. He graduated from Oxford with a first in English, and he then studied art at the Royal Academy for 3 years. He's quite like Stanley Spencer, who some of us looked at a while ago in Lent, because like Spencer, he locates some of his scenes in Suffolk. And if you remember, Stanley Spencer did that in Cookham, where he used to live. So they're similar in that sense. They're similar in a number of ways, actually. But Wagner's work has a very major global dimension, as we'll see. He is a very devout Christian and a very gifted lay preacher, apparently. At one stage when he was younger, he considered giving up art and getting ordained into the Church of England. But he decided that his true vocation lay with painting, and he remained there. It's quite interesting because he was brought up in a charismatic evangelical church, and he still worships at the Vineyard Church in Oxford. So he's not an Anglican. He is quite a strong nonconformist with a big, really vibrant faith himself. He is, however, very well regarded as a modern artist. He's done some lovely stained glass, and also he works in textiles, often for churches. He's had many exhibitions, published his poems, and published many of his paintings. His work is sold sometimes by Anthony Mould, who you may remember is the dealer on the television when they're trying to protect lost works of art.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Character, don't you? Well, he handles his paintings and his reproductions. And when I bought a reproduction of this painting, thinking we'd be doing this in real life, I got it from Anthony Mould's firm. He, as you see, did the first portrait of Justin Welby, and he's gradually producing a whole series of, a bit like Heike, a series of publications and paintings on the Psalms. He, as we'll see, he's got a great regard for the Jewish people, and this is reflected in many of his paintings, which focus on the Old Testament and the history of the Hebrew people as God's chosen people. People have commenting on his work have said he looks at subjects that modern art largely ignores: beauty, our relationship with God, and God's plan for the world. So these are metaphysical things, they're spiritual dimensions, and he goes beyond the material and the physical into the spiritual realm in his painting. And I wanted to start with what your views were. Do you feel differently coming to look at a painting when the artist is still alive, as Roger is? Does that affect how you feel about the painting compared with, say, looking at a painting from the Renaissance or from the 17th century or the you know, hundreds of years ago?
No, not for me.
No,
No.
no, not me.
Not me, not me.
Not me.
Don't mind.
No.
Don't mind.
We've two modern artists today, so that's interesting. Some people don't like looking at modern art very much. Much of his early work were rather grim paintings of the Docklands in East London, where he charted their decline in his paintings and portrayed very moving images of the social problems in the Docklands. It's an area of London where there are lots of migrants, and they had settled and had a number of problems, very high levels of social deprivation. And Wagner saw this as a reflection of the sufferings of the children of Israel in the Old Testament. So the history of the Jews is for Wagner a prophetic history and has resonances for us today with the people who live today as migrants, as deprived sectors of the population. So his work is an expression of his belief in the redeeming love of Christ. And he believes that through Christ's redemption, a degraded world can be transformed. And he seeks to remind us of the redemptive world of Christ through his paintings. They do have quite a personal intensity, which increases their impact. He would agree with Cézanne. Cézanne once wrote this: "I take my finished paintings and I place them next to a God-made object, like a tree or a flower. If it clashes, it's not art." So you've got this feeling that their paintings have got to be in harmony with God's creation. So let's look at this very famous painting, this work from the church, which is called Menorah, and was painted in 1993. And in case anybody doesn't know, a menorah is the Jewish 7-branched candlesticks, which denotes for the Jews a holy place. It's the oldest symbol in Judaism. And in Exodus, and I looked this up, there are the most detailed instructions in Exodus about how to make a menorah out of gold. The size of it, how big the decoration has got to be, And the menorahs they made moved with the tabernacle as the people travelled through the wilderness. And later, the menorah was lodged in the temple at Jerusalem. So it's a very important symbol in the Jewish faith. And the 7 branches have varying meanings. The one in the middle is meant to be God, and the 3 at either side, some people think that the 6, the 2 3s, were God creating the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day, the one in the middle, he rested. That represents the Sabbath. Sometimes the menorah is seen as the 6 candles represent the world's knowledge, and then God in the middle, and God drawing that to himself. So it depends where you are, I suppose. This painting that we're looking at was bought by the Ashmolean Gallery in Oxford, and it's been in St Giles Church ever since. A little bit about how he painted it, and then I've got lots of questions on it for you. Wagner used to travel a lot by train from Oxford to London. And one day on the train, he looked out of the window and they were passing Didcot Power Station.
I was going to say.
And as he passed the power station, he saw these huge mushroom-shaped clouds of condensation coming out of the cooling towers. And it was that sight that was the initial trigger for this painting. And we can see that probably very clearly. So that's how he started to do this painting. But let's look at it because there's a lot more to it. First of all, what are the 7 dominant features of this painting?
The power station itself.
The power stations, yes.
It isn't there
What is
anymore.
it representing in its arrangement?
What about the crosses?
Well, let's leave the crosses for a minute. We'll concentrate on the power station.
Oh,
What did you
right.
say, Margaret? What was your question?
When look at the arrangement of the cooling towers, what is he reminding you of there? When you think of
candles.
the title of the painting?
The candles of the
Yes.
Minerva.
Menorah.
So as you look at it, it is supposed to evoke thoughts about the menorah. The one in the middle, which is partly obscured by steam and cloud at the bottom, would in fact be the central God candlestick, the most important one, and that comes up from the actual power station. And then the 2 3s, obviously on either side. Yeah.
Quite symbolic then.
Very symbolic. So it's symbolic of the menorah. Well, come on, it's symbolic of a number of things. In front of those cooling towers are 3 crosses, and in front of them are lots of figures. Now we know the figures there are Hasidic Jews, which is a very orthodox branch of Judaism, but they're dressed as Hasidic Jews. They came from formed in the Ukraine in the 18th century. So their clothing, their hair is very, very distinctive. What can we tell from the posture of these people?
Well, they seem distraught.
Distraught, yeah.
Rather like the Wailing Wall.
Very like the Wailing Wall. They are obviously in extreme distress, aren't they?
Yeah.
You see down at the bottom, there's a child there, bottom left, hanging onto their mother's coat. You see the man there, kneeling down with his head in his hands.
It's a brilliant painting from a painterly point of view.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Now, what, in the light of that, knowing they're Hasidic Jews, let's go back to the cooling towers. So what would they evoke for us?
The gas chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the Holocaust, yeah.
His idea was they would evoke for us the Holocaust, the gas chambers. They represent the steam and the smoke. The steam represents the smoke rising up from the gas chambers and the crematoria in concentration camps. So it's a very solemn image, a very solemn link. What about the ground on which these Hasidic Jews are standing?
Tears,
Sorry?
tears. They're crying their tears, it looks to me.
Well, it's certainly very wet, isn't it?
Yes,
Very boggy.
yes, nothing like it would have been in Jerusalem.
No.
It almost looks like a beach, doesn't it?
So it's
Wasteland.
a wasteland, yes. As you look at it, I suppose words like, for me, devastation would come.
Yeah.
There's nothing growing there as far as you can see.
No, no.
Sodden, waterlogged, devastatingly depressing landscape. And that's mirrored in the devastation of the figures, the Jewish people standing there. The land has been compared by Jews in this painting to the plains of Poland during the Second World War. Apparently Polish people say they can remember areas of Poland in the war looking just like this. I've never been to Poland, so I wouldn't know, but it apparently evokes that memory. We might think not only of the war, but also of environmental degradation.
Yeah.
Noble, yeah.
You know, it's a picture of infertility, isn't it? So, why do you think the cooling towers look so menacing?
Well, they're so
Sheer,
dominant.
sheer size.
Yeah.
Sheer size. The size of them is enormous, isn't it? Compared with the painting. It's like
Yes.
2/3 of the painting. That's right. It is interesting there just to remember that during the Second World War, the Nazis placed the whole of their industrial enterprise to work out ways.
Oh, Barbara! Sorry.
In other words, the whole of their industry was devoted to exterminating the Jews. And some people say the immensity of the cooling towers would remind us of the dominance when the Nazis were in power, of the effort they went to get rid of the Jews and the way they devoted areas of their economy to doing that. Where is the light coming from?
The right.
Right. It's coming from the right.
So the effect of the way he's done the light, which is very clever looking at it, particularly if you look at the ground, what effect, because is the light high or low?
Low.
Low. Yes, quite low.
The low light, I can hardly say this, the low light from the right, that's right. Because of that, what does it have the effect when you look at the ground? What has it done?
Well, it gives you better shading and more definition of the ground.
More definition, certainly
Yeah.
the ground.
You can see the silhouette of the figures on the.
Yes, what do you think? That, look how long the shadows are cast by
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that is not accidental. He has said about this painting, that's to remind us that history casts long shadows into the future.
Ah.
So that things that happened, for example, in the Second World War, cast long shadows into our lives today. I mean, we know that, most of us, but we may not have articulated it or brought it into our consciousness. Why do you think we've got, because we haven't got onto this at all, the crucifixion here?
Yeah.
I don't know, because Jews didn't believe in Christ.
Well, yeah. The Jews did not believe Jesus was the Messiah, no.
Nope.
So why do you think we've got that there?
Smoke rising. Christ.
When a Christian looks at that, seeing the three crosses, what does it remind us of? Being
Christ's suffering.
Christ's suffering, it reminds us of, yeah. And what was the
Redemption.
Yeah.
For us.
so the three
Resurrection with the smoke
resurrection
going up.
and redemption and resurrection, yeah. This is a major theme of his painting, is the redemptive work of Christ when he died on the cross. So what he's saying is that in spite of all this horror that we can see, we mustn't forget about the redemptive and transformative work of Christ. It is, however, quite hard to put them together. It is quite challenging, I find, to see these things side by side in one painting. I don't know what you think.
But doesn't it draw you into the fact that Christ was of God? He came from God and was God. And I think that's...
As we'll come on to in a minute when we look at some paintings of Chagall, also that he was a Jew.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes, yeah.
He was king of the Jews.
Remembering Jesus was a Jew, what else might he be? Making another link here. We've got the Hasidic Jews in the front. So what is he also asking us to think about?
That he died for them as well, not just...
As well. I mean, one of the roots of anti-Semitism has been Christians saying the Jews can. Now, Jesus went his death willingly, didn't he?
He did.
Yes.
Everybody. And, you know, we believe today, as 21st century Christians, that Christ died for the sin of everybody. And, you know, he was a Jew put to death by Jews, but that represented all of us because we would have put him to death too. I mean, this is what Christian theology. I'm right here, aren't I, Ben?
Yes.
More or less.
Yeah, I think it's so important to look at this in terms of the political theology of the time, because of course looking from now we have such a clear dichotomy as to what it means to be Jewish and to be Christian in a way that in times of scriptural writing wasn't the case. And it was more interesting whether you were a Sadducee or a Pharisee or what branch of Judaism you were. So I think it's always so important to say, you know, Jesus was Jewish. That's sort of the beginning and the ending of that nature of where is Judaism in the story. Jesus is sort of just as Jewish as the Hasidic Jews at the front. So I think, yeah. So yes, Margaret, I think you're right on.
So he's also saying, and we'll get this when we come on to Chagall in a few minutes, he is making a link between the suffering of the Jews and Jesus Christ. He is saying that Christ suffered as a Jew, and in the Holocaust, the Jews were exterminated. And he's linking up the suffering of Christ with the suffering of the Jews in the Second World War in this painting. He's making quite a clear link between the two. And for us as Christians, probably we find that a harder jump to make, to see the three crosses, the crucifixion, being linked up with the Holocaust. But in fact, when you think about it, he's identifying very clearly, this is the suffering of Christ.
Yes.
And he's a Jew, and they suffer all the time too.
Very fine.
That sort of message.
Mm.
When we look,
It's interesting. Oh,
sorry?
I was just saying it's interesting. So 12 of them, as far as I can count, and you think of 12 apostles, disciples,
Yes.
as well. So
Jews,
yeah.
as far as we know, weren't they? When we looked at Emmaus last week and also the Zurbarab, we talked about paintings having a quality of stillness. Do you think this one does?
No.
No.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Sorry, Margaret, what did you say?
Yeah.
It has a stillness.
It's a very, though the images are horrific, the actual painting is somehow quite tranquil, isn't it?
Mm,
Yes.
it is.
I mean, it's not a
Yes.
turbulent painting with, you know, wind, and even with the steam coming up off the cooling towers. So his faith is the bedrock of his painting, and you can see that in this painting. George Herbert had this wonderful phrase, heaven in the ordinary. And you could say that about a lot of Roger Wagner's paintings. They remind you of heaven in the ordinary parts of life, or hell, you might say, in this painting. So many of us today, faced with turmoil and death in the world, might be rather cynical looking at this painting, I think. They would suspect that redemption is never going to be possible. Iris Murdoch once wrote, "All that consoles us is fake." She was very cynical. Any attempt at consolation was a fake, she felt. And people think like that sometimes nowadays. In contrast, Wagner believes in the politics of transcendence. He believes that in extreme desolation, such as the Holocaust, God is definitely there, and he is not absent. So in this painting, you're looking at two atrocities. You're looking at the atrocity of the crucifixion and the atrocity of the Holocaust. And what he's saying, in both events, God was there, and God can transcend evil, and he can transcend evil today. He quotes that in a concentration camp in Cologne, and you may have heard this because I'd heard this earlier, I couldn't think where. In a concentration camp in Cologne, when it was relieved by the Allies, they found that one of the prisoners, who obviously was dead, a Jewish prisoner, had scratched on the wall where he'd been kept these words, "I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. I believe in love, even though I do not feel it. I believe in God, even when he is silent."
Mm.
Cool.
Quite a challenging thought. So I think it's something he's trying to show us. I mean, we're just looking at one of his paintings, but he's got several paintings like this, which are quite disturbing. One of the characters in the Old Testament that he was very interested in was Job. And people who come to the house group will remember we did a series on Job. And this is a painting he did of Job being greeted and supported by God. It's called Out of the Whirlwind, because at the end of the book of Job, Job comes to realize that his suffering is nothing and it has been transcended by God. And at the end of the book of Job, Job says, "I admit I once lived by rumors of you. Now I have it all at first hand from my own eyes and ears." So Job had transcended and risen above his suffering. And this is an image of God greeting Job when he has been, his suffering has ended in the very last chapter. So it's quite, he's done several paintings of Job. This is just one of them.
What are the red marks on the ankle and the wrists?
Is that the cross? Where it's on the cross?
But
Well,
is this
on
God
Jesus'
or Christ?
cross, I think. Yes, isn't it the nail marks?
Yeah, nail marks.
Oh,
so-
sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So then you've got that slippage of time, not God the Father, Jesus Christ. You know, you get these movements between people because in a way the time is not like our time.
Mm.
We've got Jesus Christ, like God's suffering. And you could equally well say it's God, but he's reminded us of the suffering of God on the cross. But it's quite I think that the body language there is quite moving. It's very evocative. It's quite a small painting, this. But it does somehow generate empathy between the two people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Quite beautiful, actually,
Beautiful.
I think.
So do I.
Mm.
He's done some lovely paintings of the Supper at Emmaus and the journey to Emmaus too, which again they're very moving, touching paintings. In his own house, interestingly, I read that he has a copy of a painting I'm sure you've seen, The Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And again, Rembrandt's Prodigal Son is a painting about redemption, about the son returning and being redeemed. So it's a really, really strong theme, this theme of redemption, that God can overcome, that God's there. Any other comments on that people wanted to make?
It reminds me of paintings from the First World War, the Somme, all that destruction that you see in the First World War paintings, of what people do to each other.
Yeah.
And it's very evocative of that.
The First World War paintings, those pictures of the trenches.
Yes, where you've just got dead trees and...
How France ever grew poppies after it is amazing, really. You know, when you actually see what was done to the ground. Yeah.
We were in quarters at Didcot for 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
And it dominated the skyline every single day I lived there. I'm so glad those towers are now gone. They were horrible.
I find that picture quite painful to look at.
Yes, I think it is
the grief.
It's not a picture I don't feel one would have in one's sitting room.
No.
One wouldn't have Didcot Power Station in their sitting room, I can tell you that now. I went to school at Didcot.
Did you? Did you see it?
Yeah, it was everywhere. I mean, I lived in the country and travelled into Didcot by the school bus, and it dominated the skyline. Even when they built up all the way around it, it was a massive employment hub at the time. And I've still got friends that live close by, and it was a massive thing when they were brought down. So you can understand why he picked it, because it was so predominant in the skyline.
I think this painting is obviously much bigger than you're seeing it, but it conveys that very well, this feeling of dominance and imminence. It's a very, they are quite horrific when you look at them like that.
Yes, yeah. I think the thing that strikes me is if God is supposed to be represented in the middle, that's the powerhouse.
Yes, it is. That's right.
So where the power, the cooling towers are something different, but the power is actually coming from the centre. It emanates from the centre.
Yeah. I don't understand why there's so much. I don't understand why there's so much vapour around the bottom of the middle tower. I wonder what that's for.
No, I don't. It's actually come from where the power's generated. I read this in one of the comments, and he said he's deliberately obscured the buildings.
It might have detracted if you had the building there. It would have detracted from the central cross.
Yeah.
Yes, true. It would. Yeah.
Yeah. That may be.
I mean, when you first look at the painting, you almost have to look really, really hard, and then you see the crosses.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they're quite faint, really, at the first glance.
But the shadows on the actual towers are very much like that when the sun's shining in the right direction.
I noticed that there is only one inscription on the crosses, the middle one.
Yeah. Right, King of the Jews.
The others are unnamed.
Yes, well,
they're the two thieves.
Indeed, they are.
Have any, did they? I don't think. And it's this identification of the Jews with Jesus, you know, the way they're looking at that cross. Okay, we better move on to the next. Now, I'm pairing this with the work of Marc Chagall. I don't know if anybody's familiar with his work. He died relatively recently. I'll say a little bit about him, then we're going to look at two of his paintings, and they fit in very well with this painting we've just looked at, really. He's born in Russia, in Belarus, from a deeply religious Jewish family. He began painting as a boy, trained by a local painter, and then he went to St. Petersburg and went to an academy there for 3 years, and from there to Paris. And he stayed in Paris till 1914 and the outbreak of the First World War. In Paris, I think he had quite a wild time reading the books. He mixed with a very avant-garde group of artists, and he was under the influence of fashionable ways of painting, like Cubism, for example. But he himself was really interested in fantasy and dreamlike images, and he worked with those, as we'll see, all his life. When the First World War broke out, he returned to Russia, got married, and then in 1917 there was the Russian Revolution, and he was quite sympathetic to that initially. When that was over, they appointed him to be a sort of art supremo in the state in which he lived, but he fell out with them and he left after just a couple of years, and he went to Moscow, where he worked on theatre sets. Chagall did a lot of work on sets for ballet, particularly, and the theatre. Then in 1922, he left Russia for good. And he first went to Berlin and then to Paris. And here in Paris, as well as painting, he got involved in the design of sets, and also he began to work in stained glass. And he began etching. And he is almost as well known for the brilliance of his etching and printing as he is for his painting. He was highly accomplished in all those areas. While he was in Paris, gradually Chagall could see the rising power of the Nazis in Europe, and he could see that the world was going to change dramatically. And in 1938, and we won't look at it just yet, he painted the White Crucifixion, which is one of the paintings we're going to look at. And he then went and lived in the Loire, trying to escape the work of the Nazis in Paris, but he still felt it was unsafe because he was Jewish. So in 1941, he and his wife went to the USA. His wife died in 1944, and her death is a recurring motif in many of his paintings. In 1946, he'd become very well known in America, and he actually had a major exhibition at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, in New York, and also in San Francisco. 1948, he returned to France, and he returned initially to Paris, but he settled the rest of his life on the French Riviera. And he painted then a huge amount of painting for 30 years. And he became very famous for his stained glass. He made stained glass for churches, for synagogues, and some of his most famous is in the United Nations in New York. We're going to now look at a relatively small painting. This is his painting Exodus, 1950. And it shows the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. Being a fantasist, Chagall has made the sea red. Can you see? Going up the painting on the left. Ignore for a moment what is surprising about the painting. People, that is the Hebrew people escaping from Egypt and crossing the Red Sea. Interestingly, down at the bottom right, you can see a man in white carrying tablets. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that is actually Chagall, and he has given himself a good job of carrying the Ten Commandments as they continue on their journey. So, in other words, he's identified himself as Jewish, and he's escaping with it. But what is for us, as we look at it, really surprising about that painting? When you think it's the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea.
Well, because you've got Christ on the cross.
So you ask yourself, so what Chagall doing? Putting Jesus Christ crucified in the middle of the painting. So what is he doing? In the light of what we've said so far, what is he doing?
He's bringing other elements to the whole thing together, like other bits of history.
Yes, he's
So that
not painting a picture set in time, is he?
Yeah.
Because the crossing of the Red Sea was a long time before Christ died.
Yeah. But he's redeeming them from their captivity in Egypt. So he's redeeming them again, redeeming.
This theme of redemption, he is actually there, and they are being enabled in their escape from the Egyptians, if you remember. And they were on a journey to the promised land. God was guiding them. And we tend to think of it, I think we often forget the Trinity. We think, you know, God was there guiding him. And here, what he's saying is to us, as in the previous, remember, Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
So as they crossed the Red Sea, he was there with them. Because he's painting metaphysical, eternal truths, not literal truths. But he wants us, wants the viewer to locate Christ as a Jew. And it is a painting this about deliverance. So again, it's reminding us that Christ came to deliver the world. In 1948, the State of Israel was formed. So to some degree, his paintings reflect this political change in the history of the Jews. But he is linking clearly, as Wagner did, the Holocaust, what happened in the Second World War, with Jesus Christ as a Jew. He did a lot of paintings like this with crowd scenes. There are a whole series on the Exodus, which consist of all these people crowding in and at various stages in their journey. Let's move on now to the really big painting, which was a turning point for him, which is the white crucifixion. Here it is being hung up, and you get some idea of the size of it there. It is a big painting. Now, this painting was a turning point for Chagall. It was the first in a series of paintings which showed Jesus Christ as a Jewish martyr. And he was drawing attention to the sufferings of the Jews under the Nazis in the 30s, and he linked it, as we've said, to the suffering of Christ on the cross. Now, he does this in this painting in a number of really intriguing ways. If we look at the portrayal of Jesus on the cross there, now, what is different there from the way we would traditionally see Jesus? He's actually linked it up with Judaism. In what ways?
And he's got the cloth, hasn't he?
He's got a loincloth, hasn't he? Which was, it's in fact a Jewish prayer shawl.
Yeah.
With a loincloth. So he's changed the way we would normally see a loincloth on the cross. What else?
And he also has a cloth on his head rather than the crown of thorns.
Yeah, no crown of thorns, but in fact a Jewish headcloth on his head. And if we just come back a bit now to look at the angels, in fact, I was looking at some paintings last night of the crucifixion, and European ones have lots and lots of lovely angels around. If you look here, the angels are quite different. Who do you think they're representing?
They're very Jewish.
The rabbis.
The rabbis.
Yeah, rabbis.
They're representing, in fact, the Jewish patriarchs like Abraham and Isaac, Moses, people like that. And one woman as well. We don't know which.
Oh, yeah.
People from the Old Testament, the great founders of the Jewish faith, as in the Old Testament. Instead of, we would see angels floating around there and a lot of non-Jewish painting. Here we've got these people almost like disembodied, you know, floating around the top of the cross. Then if you look down at either side of the cross, we see more evidence of this Jewish influence. What's happening at each side of the cross?
You've got a Star of David on the right,
Yeah.
by the fire.
On the left, upside down houses.
Is that the Russian Revolution on the left, is it?
What's happening to the houses?
Falling down.
They're
They're
falling
being burnt.
They're being
Destroyed.
burned. It's to remind us of the pogroms when Jewish homes were around in many parts of Europe. You see the soldiers behind with their red flags
Yeah.
coming to destroy that Jewish village. On the right, as you rightly said, the Star of David, you've got the flames leaping up and the burning there of a synagogue.
Oh, yeah.
And if we move down the painting a bit, yeah, you'll see now here people in the boat and this man here. What do you think they're representing?
Escaping.
Right.
Escaping, yes. They're representing the Jews fleeing from persecution. So their villages are burnt and destroyed, and obviously they're left with running away. So we've got people in a boat trying to escape. We've got this man here on the right in his coat, escaping with his hands, as it were, praying. We've got the man on the left carrying the scrolls from the temple. If you go
yes, yeah.
You know, they're wound up like that, and carrying those as they run away from the flames. We've got a mother comforting her child at the bottom, who is also fleeing. And of course, we've also got the very candlestick we started off on.
Yeah.
At the bottom. And it's one candle short, actually.
Yeah,
it does look like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
No, there's 6 there. 1, 2, 3,
6.
4, 5,
Right.
6. Yeah.
7.
6 is
One of the
not
things about the candlestick at the bottom is it appears to have a halo round it. And the halo is round the candlestick, and it's also round Jesus's head.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's linking again Christ as a Jew and the Jewish faith being bound up in Christianity very, very closely, the two being together. And here, because of when it was painted in the 38, he is identifying the Nazis as the tormentors, basically. And at this stage, you know, war had just, I don't know if war had broken out, but living in France, he had already had, you know, a very clear vision of what was happening in Europe. So
why is there a ladder, Margaret?
Sorry?
The ladder. It seems we have a ladder at the cross.
Yes, I wondered about that.
And there's another one.
Is it Jacob's ladder? Because Jacob went up and down. Didn't the angels and everything went up and down towards heaven? It connected him to heaven, didn't it, at the time? So whether like that is now saying Jesus is here, this is heaven, this is your redemption, Jacob. You know, because that's what he saw, didn't he? He saw angels descending and ascending on the ladder. That's the only I can think of.
And you see the stream of light behind. It reminds us perhaps of the second painting we saw last week of Emmaus. Do you remember with the golden cross?
Yeah.
Here you've got this area of light streaming down behind the cross. So in many ways, a very strange painting, strange perspectives, strange symbolism to our eyes in lots of ways, and very different from European paintings, old ones, I mean, of the crucifixion. So Chagall is trying to remind us, just as Roger Wagner was reminding us, that Jesus Christ can be fully identified with suffering in the 20th and 21st century, and particularly the suffering of the Jews. I don't know if anybody's seen Picasso's painting Guernica, which was painted in the Second World War, which is very similar, where Picasso showed this village being devastated during the Second World War. and the atrocities are portrayed in the painting. And of course, we're surrounded today, as we look at these paintings, by similar atrocities. We only have to look at what's happening in Syria at the moment. The other day on the news, I was quite moved, actually. It brought a lump to my throat. They had a picture of Syrian children being taught in school. And firstly, they showed the father, whose wife had been killed in the bombing by Assad, sending his 2 little boys off to school. And he commented to the BBC reporter that to let them go to school, every day he went through torture thinking, can they go to school or should I keep them at home? Because the schools had been bombed and destroyed, and one in the village was destroyed. And they knew it was a school. He said they're all clearly marked. But he felt they must have their education. So these 2 little lads, about 7 and 5, go, again, I found it moving, going through the rubble and the broken houses, the devastation, just like the first picture we looked at. And they arrive, there they are in school. And there's the teacher bravely teaching them. And obviously a very basic classroom, but not a million miles from certainly schools I've been to in South Africa. And it was very like that, until suddenly she's talking to them and there's this ear-piercing alarm goes off. And the children immediately, as one, get down under their desks. And the teacher is saying to them, get down, and they get down, and this noise goes over. But they then had to evacuate the building. And the bit I found most moving was these children were helped out by the teacher into the corridor. And the final shot was just of these little kids. They would only be 5 or 6. They were tiny children running along this corridor with their heads down. And and I just found that said it all. You know, that little children are spending their childhood running out of school with the sound of this noise and possibly, you know, the danger of their own deaths at that young age. And I think, therefore, these paintings that we've looked at today are quite, I think, painful paintings to look at, because the suffering of the Jews is replicated in all nations where there is, you know, torture and persecution. And of course, one of the roles of art, I think, is to reflect what's going on in the world. And it isn't just about bowls of fruit and flowers and pastoral scenes, but there is a place for art to remind us of the less comfortable areas of our lives. I don't know what you think about that. Any comments?
I think it's very thought-provoking.
Well, there's something about that sort of Iris Murdoch sense of being able to reconcile the irreconcilable without even sort of getting to the point of reconciliation.
Yes.
I think the sort of the nature of putting Christ in the midst of suffering for our own imagery is incredibly helpful, because of course it gets to that point of redemption, but with that real ineffable lack of ability to articulate what that redemption really means. It really does sort of put us into a sort of a very mystical place of being able to sit with things that are uncomfortable and learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think you've done marvelously, Margaret, at giving us these images that are irreconcilable parts of our faith. The nature of Christianity and the impact of Judaism in the last, well, since our inception, has been really difficult. And in all of the liturgical pastoral introductions for the Church of England Liturgy for Holy Week always gives a health warning to anyone who's leading liturgy and reminds us of the real danger of clumsily putting our narrative forward. But these pictures really very articulately put these two bits of suffering alongside each other in such a good, timeless way. So yeah, sorry, getting off on one, but yeah, I think it's a marvelous way of being uncomfortable in an artistic sense. Yeah.
They are all thought-provoking.
Mm.
Somebody was saying something.
I'm just saying they're all thought-provoking.
I wonder, in the last picture, there was odd things that we didn't sort of discover. There was an enormous chicken on the right-hand side.
Yes,
Like
and there was a
baby.
serpent.
I mean, what was that about?
I don't know if it's he's combined Christianity there, and this is a memory of
Yeah, there, you can see it, can't you?
huge chicken.
With a cherub sitting on it or something.
Yeah.
Because it can't be prophetic about Peter denying Christ, I don't think.
Oh, the cock crowing.
Cock crowing.
Could be, yes, could be.
Put up there something that could be.
And the serpent up on the, is that a
Yeah.
serpent at the top?
Yeah. It's very weird.
Mm.
And this lady upside down.
Yeah.
The chicken up in a womb.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. It looks like, but it's a woman being born, not a baby.
I know, it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it also shows us that God was willing to leave his place of glory and come to the earth in all identifying with all of our brokenness and sinfulness, and identify with it while remaining the perfect God and perfect human, and that he made the way for us. So it says it all, really.
It's very dark and oppressive, I think, that.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
But then, you know, you can sanitize the crucifixion, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
Do it in our own minds. And I was just thinking, next week we're coming into Holy Week, the week running up to Easter itself. And how far do we really take in the horrific nature of what happened in that week? And very often, the temptation is to slide over it. I mean, I have always felt, I go to Good Friday services because I think it's important to go, when we've had them. But I always dread going because they're so depressing and solemn and mournful. And then I say to myself, but this is what life is. A lot of life is exactly like that. It is about suffering and deprivation and degradation. And you can't just go on just picking out the bits that you're comfortable with. Which is the temptation, for all of us. And Easter, I think, Lent and Easter are essentially a very uncomfortable time.
Well, that definitely affirms that. Yeah, no, it's very thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah.
Is that a suitcase or a box that's had a car crash?
I don't know.
Looks like a radio or a speaker.
I thought that looked like a speaker, I must admit. Do you mean the thing with the flame coming out of?
Yeah, what is that? Or is that a village?
I think that's supposed to be houses, isn't it?
They're houses.
Yeah.
They're houses, aren't they?
Yeah.
You have to wonder what sort of mindset that artist was in when he painted that.
Well, you've got to remember the purpose of art sometimes for us is to help us. This is one of the reasons I call it seeing and believing, because one of the purposes of looking at paintings is to change the way we see things, change the way we see events, for example. So we've probably never really thought about the children of Israel. We've probably got almost children's picture book pictures of the crossing of the Red Sea and Moses in the bulrushes and all that. And we lose the horror of those events, of the migration of a whole tribe of people it's like we gloss over the Passover and the killing of all those Egyptians as they left, and then swarming across the land, you know, trying to find the promised land, wandering around in circles. And art, in part, one of the functions of art, I think, is to face us up with the less comfortable areas of our lives. So certainly for me, a great deal of the art I look at is art that is enjoyable to look at. I don't find this painting enjoyable, or the White Crucifixion, or Wagner's painting that we started off on enjoyable. But then I don't think a painting being enjoyable makes it any less of a good painting, because the purpose here is to actually make us start think about events and think about our own lives. And I think this is the great thing about art. It has many functions, you know. It can soothe us when we're in distress, and it can waken us up out of our lethargy when we're complacent. But obviously we've got to be open to it and look at it.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so it reminds me a bit like Stanley Spencer's, where he's in that crypt in, I can't think where it is now, but he's painted all the way around the walls. And it's very cathartic for him from the First World War. The terrible atrocities that he saw, and he had to do it. It was almost like, for him, it looked chaotic to us, wouldn't it? But for him, it was a way of expressing his own feelings, experiences, and I suppose these are a similar thing really for them.
And I suppose, you know, we do know intellectually anyway, we may not know it in our lives, that, you know, atrocities need to be recognized and faced up to in our minds. You know, think, what do we believe about them? Otherwise we end up with a sort of very selective sort of faith that looks only at nice bits. But I think the thing between Christ and the Jewish, you know, painting the Jewish people is a very interesting, quite a powerful one. Okay, well, I think that draws us to a close actually, and again, thank you very much for joining in.
Well, thank you for putting it together.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, as well.
Margaret.
Yes,
Brilliant.
thank you, Margaret. It's
Ben.
been
Certainly thought-provoking.
Indeed. All
very
right.
illuminating,
Hmm.
very brave.
I think later on, we've got Ben on a similar theme at 4 o'clock.
We do. I was just going to thank you, Margaret. I think you really have sort of shown us through art so many different ways of, well, ways of seeing and believing, but also ways of holding things that are profoundly uncomfortable. And I think, as you say, if there's anything about Holy Week and the crucifixion, it's wholly uncomfortable. And I think having the articulation and skill to be able to hold that for a while, particularly through art, is profoundly helpful in terms of nurturing our own faith and being able to sit with uncomfortable parts of our own lives as well. Yes, as you're saying, Margaret, next week, this is my advert, because we're having Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, 4 o'clock during Holy Week, all sorts of different reflections. We'll have you again, Margaret, on Tuesday as we look at doubt. Matt on Wednesday as we look at journeying, and next Monday I'll look at the Passover and some of the themes that Jesus brings up in his Last Supper, but particularly again picking up on Margaret's theme of looking at our own Jewish roots in our expression of faith, because actually the Jewish nature of faith in the midst of Holy Week is at its highest, and actually I think it's the time in our own Christian calendar where we forget it most, and without a sense of reconciling Jesus's own faith as a rabbi and as someone who's saturated in that Jewish symbolism, we miss an awful lot of what the gospel writers are telling us, and sometimes with their own particular biases towards their own faith and their relationship with their temple at the time. But yes, I look forward to Holy Week. But no, thank you, Margaret. This has been a fantastic few weeks.
Yeah.
Really embedding, thinking about
Very
faith.
good.
Very good.
Very good audience.
Thank you.
Well done, well done, well done.